Texas, every single year we ask this, are they finally going to be back? Is Texas finally going to be back in 2023, Sam? And I don't know about you, but I feel like this is it. I feel like Texas has too good of a squad not to be back this year. If Texas can't even win 10 games this year, I just lose all hope for the foreseeable future when it comes to Longhorns football. Because if this isn't the year, I don't know when it ever is going to be the year.
Yeah. If if they do what they did last year again this year, I will have the same mentality about them that I do about Oklahoma right now. It will flip that quickly. And they have no, I mean, let's look at their schedule. Just very briefly. Like, bear with me here. Texas, they open up the year, of course, playing a very easy opponent. Don't want to go over that. Alabama is the biggest team that they face all year. On the road, it's Steve Sarkisian's former head coach, Nick Saban, and it's the only team that they're going to face all year that has more talent than they do. And then after that, after Alabama and Rice, as Josh Pate would say, they play food in week
Food.
one. After Rice and on the road at Alabama, they host Wyoming, they play at Baylor, they host Kansas,
Don't overlook that
Oklahoma,
game. I feel like a lot of
Kansas.
people are overlooking Kansas, man. Like, they're up there in returning production. They got a squad. They got a solid offensive line, and they got a superstar quarterback in Jalen Daniels. And I don't think enough people understand how important it is when you have a quarterback that's on the caliber that Jalen Daniels is. When you have that kind of talent at quarterback, you should be in a handful of games, even if you don't have a great defense, which Kansas probably won't have, even though they do have some pretty good players on that side, like Kenny Logan at safety. With Jalen Daniels, he's going to keep you in a lot of games. So as long as Kansas can avoid going into the fourth quarter being down by like 10 points and it's a close game, I think they could possibly pull off the upset. And I think the biggest threat in the Big 12 this year to Texas, to me, is Kansas. I think that's one of the biggest games in the Big 12 this year. I think Kansas is really that kind of team. But outside of that, I mean, like, I feel like they probably could, run the table on their schedule, at least for the next couple of weeks after. But I'll let you continue. I just had to say that.
Oh no, you're good. You're good. And I say that because I have Kansas, full disclosure, including the bowl game. I have them going 10-3, and they're my top 25. So I totally
Oh!
agree with you. That's in my bold predictions
Oh!
video.
Okay,
Like
I see you,
10,
Sam.
yeah, 10-3, and their offense is probably going to be top 10 in the country in scoring. Like that team will they will destroy any defense they face except for maybe a defense like Iowa's or Iowa State's that are just so fundamentally sound it's going to be hard to hang more than 20 on them anyway. And
But
Texas does
Texas,
not have that defense,
well, Texas
in my
could
opinion at
have
least.
a really solid defense this year. Now, I don't know if their defense will go in and, shut down Kansas. I'll be really surprised if that were to happen, even though they are playing Kansas at home. I just think with how good Jalen Daniels is, like, with how he played before he went down with that injury, if he can get back to that same level, which I believe he will, I think that could be a really good game. But I probably still will give Texas the edge. I know this seems like a Kansas love fest and we talking about Texas, but I really think that's one of the biggest games for Texas this year. Honestly.
Oh yeah. And do not overlook, I would say, Kansas State on the schedule, or TCU, or even Iowa State, even Texas Tech. I mean, that last 4-game stretch, they're teams that in theory shouldn't touch Texas, but the reality is, given Texas's history and given the fact that all of those teams, minus TCU, are very fundamental, very sound, they could easily give Texas problems. And then TCU, from what we've seen, I mean, with even Gary Patterson, I mean, they dominated that Texas rivalry. It's on the road. TCU is going to be a massive underdog because Texas is going to be favored in every game except the Bama game. They have too much talent, too much money behind them. And TCU still, they're still going, I think, with the staff they have, the explosive wide receivers, tight end Jared Wiley, and their defense. This may sound shocking, but they returned some players at secondary, and you don't have Bijan Robinson at Texas anymore, so your strength's going to be passing the football. That's another interesting game. And I think that I think that in that November stretch, Texas is going to lose one of those games. I don't think they're there yet. I'm having it as TCU because it's the road game. TCU, I think, has the best staff out of those four teams, outside of maybe Kansas State. But it could be any of those teams. But to get back to Texas, because we have been talking a lot about other Big 12 teams, but we have to.
Yeah, you got to set the stage.
Exactly. Exactly. And the Big 12 is going to be a really fun conference. I think almost anyone can win it. Texas, of course, is the most likely, I think by a mile, but other teams have a lot of chances, a lot of opportunities. Texas is prone to upsets, as we know in past history. I think they're nearly back, if not back. I think they're back. I'm going to go and say I think they're back. Um, Now, of course, that opinion could change. This could be, the first year I fall for the trap, and it's like, well, you still fell for the trap, the bear trap. Um, and that'd suck. But they're the most talented team. They're evenly recruited. I didn't mention this earlier, but I wanted to. But they have a great play caller in Sark. I already mentioned that, who coordinated one of the probably the best offense in Alabama history in 2020. Kyle Flood's a great recruiter and developer at O-line. And then Pete Kwiatkowski, I hope that's how you pronounce his name. He was the defensive coordinator at Boise State and Washington under Chris Peterson when those were defensive. They had good defenses. They also had good offenses. But Washington, from what I can recollect, in 17 and 18, the only reason they weren't terrible, because Matt Lubick was a horrible offensive coordinator, they were good because their defense was good. I mean, Jonathan Smith was the reason they went to the playoff. And then that defensive staff, including Jimmy Lake, was the reason that they didn't collapse once Smith left. That's just my opinion. So they have a good staff. It's all about Steve Sarkisian now. If they're not back this year, there cannot be any excuses. They've used the portal, they've recruited well, they have a good staff, they have money. That's on him, which is pretty damning going into the SEC. Because now you're thinking, well, if he's not it, maybe he is, but we'll have to wait another year. Who is it? We're going to have to do this again and again and again and again, potentially. And you're back to where Oklahoma's at, except better because you have more in-state talent and you at least have a staff with a good reputation and you've properly built your team. So I think Texas is back for sure, but we'll have to see how it plays out this year because the Big 12, I mean, Texas and Oklahoma have been predicted to win the Big 12 for probably the last decade. Maybe I think 2015 was the last time they weren't. And Oklahoma won it that year. So Big 12's wide open a lot of years, and especially in the future when Texas leaves, whether it's Deion Sanders or Sonny Dykes, Lance Leipold in Kansas State, it'll be even more wide open. It'll be maybe a new champion every year. We'll have to see. So Texas, I think they're back, but we'll have to see.
And thinking about the talent that they have on offense, you got Quinn Ewers, which there was a report that came out that said that some coaches think that they expect Arch Manning to take over eventually. I don't really think that's going to happen. Quinn Ewers did show a lot of promise. I didn't think he was shit. I actually liked what I saw out of him. The problem with Quinn Ewers is that he was heavily inconsistent. When he was on, he was on. He was making big time throws downfield. But when he was off, it was pretty bad. And looking at their roster, you got Xavier Worthy, who battled with injuries last year, one of the best receivers in all of college football. Jordan Whittington, Isaiah Nayer. Yeah, they did lose B. John Robinson and Roshan Johnson, but they got a lot of talent in the backfield. They're going to have one of the best offensive lines in college football. I mean, they don't need a great defense to run through this conference because you look at what they have offensively. I mean, I don't really think anybody in the Big 12 should really be able to slow down this offense. I think that this should easily be an offense that's capable of being able to hang 35, 40 plus on you with ease. Now, you may run into a couple of games where, your offense may start out a little bit slow, but overall, like, I kind of feel like Texas should at least beat the majority of teams on their schedule this year outside of Bama and maybe a couple of games or two. But outside of that, I feel like they should be able to at least win every game outside of a couple by at least 14. Like, this is a really
Oh
good
yeah.
squad. Like, I feel really confident in this Texas team. I don't really feel like this is a team that's going to be able to be less than a 10-win program this season. Like, if they win less than 10
Yeah.
games, like you said, like, I just lose all faith in Texas football this year. There's way too much talent for Texas not to be able to at least win this conference this year. And I understand like why they're always favored because you recruit so well. So obviously, if you recruit so well compared to the other teams in this conference, I mean nobody else is really touching OU and Texas in recruiting. So it's
Yeah.
like for me,
And that's Oh, go ahead.
I was saying for me, I just personally feel like Steve Sarkisian has a really good team this year that's capable of being able to compete for a national championship. I don't really think there's another team in the conference that's really close. OU, I mean, they could be the second best team, but I kind of feel like Kansas and a couple of other teams could overtake them. I'm not thinking they're going to be bad, but I just think that Texas, the gap between them and the rest of the Big 12 is pretty huge. And if you're a fan of another team in the Big 12 not named Texas, I feel like you got to kind of give Texas their props for what they have. Like, they got a really good squad going into this year.
Oh yeah. I 150% agree with you right there. The gap in theory is massive. I mean, there's no reason to think otherwise in my mind. And that's like if there's no excuse to not win the Big 12 this year. There isn't. Like if Texas Tech wins the Big 12 or if Kansas State repeats or TCU wins the Big 12, Kansas State and Kansas and all those programs have like a microcosm of the talent that you do. And in the case of Texas Tech and TCU, they would have done it in a shorter period of time than your head coach was there. I mean, what does that say? That's why I can't disagree with you. If they don't win it this year, or maybe because there's always exceptions to the rule. If they go 12-0 or 11-1 and lose in the Big 12 title game, that's another thing. That's a totally different conversation. But if you go 9-4, 8-5, or maybe you're like Texas in 2018 where they limp into the conference championship game because of what turns out to be, a win against Oklahoma that maybe in 10 other realities doesn't happen, or worse than that, then you lose faith in the head coach and the CEO because he's recruiting well. His staff's developing them somewhat well. I mean, you have guys that are listing Quinn Ewers as all-conference, all-American, Heisman. Xavier Worthy's rightly being listed as like one of the best wide receivers in the nation. You have a great O-line who returns all 5 of their starters. Jatavion Sanders could be the nation's best tight end. Could be. I think Brock Bowers is number 1, but he has that talent. And defensively, you've proved if you can't win with that, what are you going to win with? You can't. It's impossible. You can't do it.
Come on now, dog.
It's like you have
Come on,
Alabama's
man.
talent. You go 9-4, 10-3 every year. I mean, you can't there at that point, you have to have a change. Either you as a coach have to change, which very few have done, Dabo Swinney, Jim Harbaugh. Very few have done that after they arrive at a job for multiple years, or you have to go out and get someone. So if I mean, in my mind, I'd love for Kansas or Texas Tech or someone to win the Big 12, but to me, it's so obvious that Texas should win. I'm just gonna I mean, and I think they should, and I think Sarkisian's improving. I think they will. But that question does have to be posed. If they lose to Bama, and then after like last year, after losing to Bama, they then lose like a September or October conference game, then you have to the questions begin to get tough.